You have accessed the podcast of OA, located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will. The podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Hey guys, welcome back to another podcast of OA. This is Phil Bova. Nice to see you guys again. This is episode 126, coming at you from Mogo this time. And then I got my awesome, amazing partner, Myron Rumsey.
Hey Phil, how you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. Sorry, I can't talk very well. It's been a hectic day.
Well, you and I both work in the educational field, and right. This is the weeks leading up to the busiest time of our lives for our school year. That's for sure.
You're exactly right.
Yeah. So anyway, we've got a lot to talk about. You know, we kind of ended the Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps book in the last episode, and we've got 3 issues of Green Lanterns to go over.
Right.
To get ourselves caught up. And, it'll be kind of neat because one of the things that spun out of our conversation with Robert Venditti was that DC contacted me about us interviewing Dan Jurgens in a couple weeks, if his schedule allows. So it's a good idea to get caught up because we can talk about issues 53 and 54, and we're going to be talking to Dan Jurgens, hopefully, about issue number 54 when it comes out.
Now, when does he end his run on Green Lanterns? Do you know what issue that is?
I think it's 57.
Okay, that's an odd number to quit on.
Yeah. It's. I think they're ending in October to make way for the whole Morrison run.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Hey, we've been talking about the last couple of episodes, all the rumors swirling around Kyle Rayner and Heroes in Crisis, and I thought it was interesting that Newsarama actually picked it up as a story and covered it, and they did their list of characters most likely to die, and Kyle was nominated as the most likely to be killed off. So
it was a really, really good breakdown, though, how they did it. They really, really added a lot of criteria towards who they think would be, who they think would die. And I'll tell you what, people should check it out. There's a lot of good stuff on there that adds merit to their reasoning for making that.
Yeah, they kind of went through and did the most likely to least likely and did pros and cons of each character that looked like it was going to be in the chopping block. And the only thing, I've got to add is I still in the back of my head think Kyle's going to be the murderer. I think these Reddit rumors and 4chan rumors that are swirling aren't exactly accurate. Maybe Kyle will bite the bullet. It wouldn't be the first time that Tom King has killed Kyle, and I guess I would take that with a huge grain of salt. Is somebody actually going to die, or is it going to be like the death of Kyle Rayner in Omega Man, where he was beheaded in that first issue, and next issue you find out it was all a ruse? So is he dead, or is he air quote dead?
Well, now what you mentioned something about the Reddit users. What are they saying?
Well, there was somebody on Reddit who claimed to have inside knowledge, saying that, and this is, people who want to hear the rumors and stuff, turn away now or don't listen to this section. But they were saying that Wally was going to be the bad guy. He was going to be the murderer. He was going to kill Arsenal and then accidentally kill Kyle, and that in the end, that Wally would end up becoming part of the Suicide Squad.
Interesting. That's an interesting theory. That's kind of out there.
Yeah. And I part of what it said is that Carol was going to break up with Hal over it because Carol didn't want to lose Hal like she lost Kyle, which doesn't really line up at all with what we know as of Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps number 50. Not that Heroes in Crisis is beholden to that.
Well, and not only that, it just seems like, Carol has more vested in Hal Jordan than she ever did with Kyle. So I think that would be more reversed, right?
Right. I think this whole Carol Kyle thing needs to be forgotten about and pretend it never happened.
Yeah, I didn't care for it. I didn't think it didn't fit. It didn't feel like it fit.
No, it was very unnatural. But we'll see what happens with Heroes in Crisis. That starts up in September. I'm kind of interested in reading it just because I've been a fan of a lot of Tom King's work. I think his Batman Elmer Fudd crossover was spectacular, and his Hal Jordan solo Darkseid War book was really, really good. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, that'd be good. Tom King, he's a good writer.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, I agree. Hey, I want to give a shout out too. My wife and I went away this past weekend for a couple days, just to kind of get away and take a little mini vacation. We went to Cleveland, and I got to meet up with Sean Whalen from the Raging Bullets podcast. And for those that don't know the origin of the podcast of OA and the blog of OA, everything that I'm doing spun out of Raging Bullets. I was so enthused by the positivity that Sean Whalen and his co-host Jim had on the show, Jim Seguin, that they have on the show. Their chemistry and their positivity about comics drew me back into DC in a big way right about the time that Jeff Johns had taken over the Green Lantern and done Green Lantern Rebirth. And long story short, I ended up being on their show several times to talk about Green Lantern after I started the blog because I was inspired by them. And then their involvement in doing their podcast and me getting my toes wet in podcasting when Bill came along and said, hey, you want to do a show? It just seemed like a natural fit. But just the power of the internet, there's so much negativity surrounding the internet. And, you and I work in the educational space. We hear it all the time about, we have to filter the internet from kids for certain things and so on and so forth. One of the positive things is how it shrinks the world. And Sean and I have never met in person. And this was an opportunity where I got to, because I was in the same state, I was about a half an hour from where he lives. I got a chance to meet him for the first time in 8 years. So we've had this online friendship for 8 years and finally just now got a chance to meet in real life. And it was just as if we were talking, just so we could see each other for the first time. So it was really cool. But if you guys have not checked out the Raging Bullets podcast, please do so. There's some criticism of the length of the show and how everything is positive. And one of the things when you talk to Sean, he'll tell you is the reason why it's all positive is that they choose to only talk about the books they like, and they're covering the entire DC universe. So of course they're talking positively because they're talking. Why would they want to spend their energy talking about books they don't like? Right.
Sense. I mean, there's enough bad reviews out there. They can just read that themselves,
Right. And, when it comes to the length of the episodes, these guys are passionate about the books and they really go in depth and analyze these books in a great deal of depth. So, if you can stand a 2 hour or 3 hour podcast, it's definitely worth checking out. And even if it's maybe too long for you, you can chunk it. You can listen to a segment about a book that you're interested in and skip over one you're not. Or one of the things I always did is I picked a book I wasn't currently reading to listen to because maybe it'd get me interested in a new series. So, check it out if you guys haven't yet. I highly recommend it.
Cool. Very cool.
And these guys, just to give you an idea of longevity, these guys have recorded over 530 podcasts.
Man, they've been going for a long, long time.
Definitely. Great couple of guys. I haven't had a chance to meet Jim. He had family in town from Italy, so obviously he was spending time with his family. But it was a great experience to get to meet somebody who you kind of look up to, but is also a peer and a friend. And it was just a neat experience. I would have to say one of the neatest experiences I've had coming out of doing all this stuff.
And that's really cool when you can when you take a trip and you're in the location of somebody you've built a relationship with over the course of time, and you both take the time to meet up like that and to meet in person and talk about the things instead of over the phone or over Skype or whatnot. It'd be like you and I meeting up at some point. You know what I mean?
Right. The cute thing was we both, he had brought his wife with him and I had my wife with me. So we're over there talking comics and the two of them are just looking at us like, okay, guys.
That's what happens though. I mean, that's what happens. One of my friends, Brian, and he's a listener now. I'm trying to get him into the Green Lantern universe. And this podcast has helped, and then I've given some recommendations as far as where to start. But Brian and his wife, or his girlfriend Rachel, whenever they come over, it's usually him and I talking comics, and it's usually my wife and Rachel, and they talk about what they're talking about. So, yeah, we're trying to get the girls involved, but it's a long struggle.
I know what you mean. Well, we've got some comics to talk about. We're going to cover Green Lanterns 50 through 52, and then we're going to do a retro review, and we've got some listener feedback.
All right. Sounds great.
So we'll be right back, guys.
The Island, a comic, sci-fi, fantasy, pop culture podcast. I'm Dan.
I'm Matt.
And if you like spoiler-free
and spoiler-full
discussions, then you definitely want to check out this podcast. We cover The Flash,
Black Lightning,
Supergirl,
Legends of Tomorrow,
Stranger Things,
Legion,
The Gifted,
Gotham,
Walking Dead,
Fear the Walking Dead,
Westworld,
Game of Thrones.
So don't forget to check us out on all of your popular podcast apps.
Well, Phil, now that Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps is over, it's time to get caught up on Green Lanterns. So Dan Jurgens takes over for several issues. I think he's doing a 7 or 8 issue mini run. It remains to be seen whether he's going to be continuing in some capacity after Green Lanterns ends or not. But right now, we've got the first 3 parts of a brand new story arc of a book which seems more like a Green Lantern Corps book than a Green Lanterns book, as we've come to know it. But this is Evil's Might Part 1, 2, and 3. So why don't you let us know and share your thoughts and feedback on these 3 issues?
Well, to jump on your point, you're exactly right. It really actually felt like a Green Lantern Corps book. I mean, it really started out that way, and pretty much from issue 51, 52, 51, 50, 51, and 52, I mean, it felt that way the whole entire time reading it. I was really impressed with Jurgens' writing on it. I thought he did a really, really, really good job jumping off on this point. And it started strong. His story arc started strong because you get the feel that it's really, really leading up to an end game. You know what I mean? Especially with how things started in this issue.
Yeah, it seems like a big story. You know what I mean? A story that has some weight to it. And a couple of the things that I thought was really kind of neat was some of the rather obscure characters that he brings into the story. One being this character Eon, which seems like a person that almost appears schizophrenic, but when you know the history of the character, it's a character that he created back, late 80s, early 90s to be in a Superman book back when he was part of the Superman writing family. And it was a character who's actually a being of pure energy, but his mentality is composed of multiple brains. It's kind of like a collective consciousness thing.
Right.
So that's why he's always talking in plural. So there's that character, and then at the same time, you kind of have these other characters, the Ravagers, which there was a superhero team back in the 90s that was called the Ravagers, and that's not these guys. These Ravagers appeared in a Green Lantern story quite some time ago as well, and they were only they were basically minor villains to propel an issue or 2 of the book, and to see Dan Jurgens go back and pull that kind of wealth of history in minor characters and bring them back and polish them off again is really kind of neat, because one of the things you hear from fandom, especially Green Lantern fandom, is they're tired of the big events, world-ending crises, and those kind of things. And while this has the feel of something major, it doesn't feel universe-ending, but it's good to see toys that have been neglected and left on the shelf pulled back off again and reused.
Exactly. And to jump off what you said too, you're right. It feels like a self-contained storyline, right? It doesn't have a broad spectrum of issues with it, because we're not bringing anything outside like Zod did with the Hal Jordan Corps, and Orion and whatnot. This is self-contained. I mean, it stays with the Guardians, and it stays with the Green Lantern Corps. And like you had said, he pulls back some of that old material and interjects it in a new way, which is really good. Kind of like the Dark Stars with Venditti did. Right.
And, the other thing you've got going on is there's this third threat lurking inside of their power rings. Right. So you've got that piece too. So you've kind of got, a 3-pronged attack against the Green Lantern Corps at this point.
And let's not forget, it starts off with the death of Kata Sol, one of the Guardians.
Right. I mean, there were only 6. Now there's only 5. You can only kill Guardians 5 more times and they're gone.
I wish they'd go away for good. I'm just over them guys.
I think it's kind of insidious how the ring is kind of telling Simon to do something that's counter to what, for example, when Guy Gardner gives out that order and Simon's ring tells him to do something completely different. And then, it's kind of neat how the ring is kind of subverting the core from inside.
Well, I'm not going to lie. So when I was reading that issue and I saw Simon Baz go off and do his own thing, and then of course Guy Gardner's complaining about it and everybody's complaining about it, I was like, okay, I can deal with this storyline. I'm not a huge Baz fan. I think the character came along for the wrong reasons, and I think he stayed along for. And I'm not trying to tread on any Lantern fans, but I think he stayed on long enough. So at the point when he was flying off to disobey an order, I was like, okay, this is going to be cool. They're going to do something with Simon Baz, and it's not going to end well, and I'm okay with that. I hate to say it, but that's how I was feeling at that time.
I think he's probably the least liked of the Lanterns, to be honest.
So I apologize to all the listeners, but I know we all have our favorites. Unfortunately, he has never been one that I've liked at all. Period. And I wish he'd go away. So anyway, that's my bias. I got to throw that out there. Sorry, guys.
Everybody's got their likes and dislikes, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's and then they kill Penelope off too, which, long-standing character from the Silver Age,
Sure.
that Jurgens just kind of does away with.
And let's not forget, Jon Stewart gets mortally injured. Not sure if he's dead or not yet, but he gets hurt pretty bad.
Yeah. So there are stakes here, but they're not, like I said before, they're not galaxy-threatening worries, but they are things that threaten to undermine the core itself.
Which I think leading up to what Jurgens is probably going to do, and if Jeff Johns is going to jump off and this is just going to be a self-contained Hal Jordan space cop or space police kind of issue, I wonder if Jurgens is going to do something with the Green Lantern Corps that's going to eliminate a lot of characters. Does that make sense?
Well, that's one of the rumors, is that that Jurgens is kind of setting the table for Grant Morrison for when he comes on the series, and I don't know if that's true or not. There's another rumor that Dan Jurgens is going to be writing a Green Lantern Corps book that'll be launched maybe 5 or 6 issues into the Grant Morrison runner at some point after Morrison gets his feet on the ground with the book. I don't know. I think Jurgens is a good writer. I've liked him back in the days when he was part of that Superman team writing group that they killed Superman and brought him back, and that whole relaunch of Superman after the Man of Steel miniseries, not the new one, but the Man of Steel miniseries from years and years ago.
Yeah, I remember that one.
That was a great run of Superman. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I loved that writing team.
All right, and you really notice the difference in Jurgens here too. And I, reading back with the old Superman stuff that you mentioned, especially the death of Superman. Jurgens has been around for so long. He has such a backstory and rich history of DC. It was really, really nice seeing him write this book because I like the Green Lantern's title. Don't get me wrong, but it was nice to see a familiar writer on it that I knew that would do justice with the writing itself.
Right, and somebody who could handle the cosmic elements and handle the entire core, not just Simon and Jessica. I think my one concern is, and I have not seen the sales numbers for the books yet, but will people who were really into the Simon-Jessica dynamic be turned off by this being turned into a team book like this?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, from what I've gathered on the internet, and that's not sure to gauge it very well because the internet's just a hodgepodge of what, but a lot of people like Jessica, but I don't hear a lot of people talking about Baz a lot. And a lot of people are really excited that Jessica Cruz is going over to the Justice League title, which I'm happy about that because I adore her. I've been following her since Forever Evil. And I think she's a phenomenal character, and I'm glad they're keeping her around.
Well, it's interesting that Justice League Odyssey book has been pushed back. There was some debate over how to use one of the characters, and there was a problem with the artwork, or there was some kind of issue with the artwork, and so that whole series has been pushed back at least a month.
That's funny you mentioned that because I follow his name's Stefan Sejic, the guy who does the art for Justice League Odyssey, and he had posted something on the net about I guess artwork that he had to throw out because it wasn't approved or because they didn't want to use it or something like that. But he threw it out there to share it anyway. And a few of the images were Jessica Cruz.
Well, one of the things I heard, and again, this is all internet conjecture, was that the artwork may have been too, I don't want to say sexy, but too...
provocative.
Yeah, that's a good choice of words. Thank you, Phil. That's exactly what I mean.
And... I'll be honest with you. I mean, Sejic's work. I mean, I don't know if anybody's familiar with his stuff, but he writes. He did Aquaman for a while, but he also did these standalone volume books. Oh gosh, I can't remember the name of it for the life of me. But anyway, if you get on his website and check it out, some of his standalone stuff is provocative in nature. If you know what I mean. Right.
It'd be like, not expecting Ed Benes to draw butts, because that's what he does,
Right, exactly.
But speaking of artwork, I'm not sure. I'm not sold on Mike Perkins on this book, to be completely honest. I like sharper, cleaner images. And some of it's coloring, which is not his fault, but like there was some white boot issues, which is one of my pet peeves. And at one point you see Hal in his classic Silver Age costume versus his modern uniform, those kind of things. And there was just, there was a lack of detail. And some things that looked okay, like the close-ups of the Guardians, it seemed to be all right. But in other things, it didn't work for me.
Well, 52 wasn't as bad. That had Marco Santucci that did it, and that art was a little bit better in that one. But I agree with you on your first part. Yeah, you're right. I wasn't sold on Perkins either.
Yeah. Issue 52 was better.
Yeah, and had a lot of Hal Jordan in the end of it. It was good to see Hal Jordan in there, but since this is supposed to come off of the whole Hal Jordan the Green Lantern Corps book, it was a little odd that Hal Jordan was sitting on the cusp of like all these waterfalls and this real picturesque view, just chilling out or whatnot. When the last time we saw him, he was kissing Carol Ferris,
Yeah, and I think it goes back to, when you and I were talking to Robert Venditti last episode, he was talking about how sometimes there's really, in terms of behind the scenes things, there's not a real baton passing. So did Jurgens know where Rob was going to leave the book off? I don't know.
That's a good point. I didn't consider that, but yeah, that makes sense.
But it's odd to think of Hal lounging anywhere, to be quite honest.
Also true.
But, it was okay. I guess, reminiscing, or I should say reminiscing, thinking about what happened with the Dark Stars and so on. I could see Hal wanting to contemplate that a little bit maybe, but that's certainly a more retrospective portrayal of Hal that I would have expected.
Yeah, I agree. So, question for you. Who do you think is taking over the ring? Do you have any thoughts? Because they show it at the very end with the eyes or whatnot, and I racked my brain trying to figure out who it could possibly be, and I can't come up with anybody. I really can't.
Yeah, I'm racking my brain too. I don't know of anybody in current continuity that could do this kind of stuff. There's a few things that I think lead me to believe it's going to be somebody who's really good with technology. I mean, to me, I don't think this is somebody who is inside the power battery controlling the rings from within. I think this is somebody who's figured out how to hack the power rings. And I think back to the whole Zod plot line and how the Eradicator had the Green Lantern rings and was working with them.
Yeah, man, I like that character. He's a great character.
Yeah, could it be the Eradicator? One of the reasons why it wouldn't surprise me is where did the Eradicator come from? The death of Superman in the Reign of Superman arc. That
would make sense. And Jurgens wrote them guys. Actually, I think did Jurgens create the Eradicator?
I'm not sure. I know it was part of the creative process for that group. I'm not sure who individually created that character, or could it be someone else who's got a grief with the Green Lantern Corps? Could it be Cyborg Superman?
That would be nice for me because he's one of my favorite villains. The thing that I don't think it's anybody new. They have to either be pulling somebody from the backstory, or I don't think they would introduce anybody new at this point. You know what I mean?
Right. I think Dan Jurgens is very much looking at characters that he's comfortable with. Eon was his. Ravagers he didn't write, but he knows who the Ravagers are. And when you think about Cyborg Superman, he spent all that time with the Manhunters. He has an association with the Eradicator. Could this be Zod's revenge?
He's also got an association with the Sinestro Corps. He was part of the Sinestro Corps for a while in the war.
Right. So there's lots of motives that make sense, and it wouldn't surprise me to see Jurgens visit a character that he likes or that he's familiar with.
Well, it says next enemy revealed, so I guess we'll find out the next issue.
Hopefully
yeah. Talking to him about it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that if everything works out. But I thought it was a good arc overall so far. I was a little taken aback when I read that first issue and saw that it took place after Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps number 50 because, as we've discussed, it could have the potential to ruin the dramatic tension in Robert Venditti's final arc. Now, it turned out nothing other than the death of Tomar 2 happened in that arc that would be spoiled here, but you never know.
I liked how this one felt like it picked up off of Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps. I mean, it said it at the very beginning, but it wasn't just that. It just felt like it was an extension from that came out of that book when I was reading it myself.
Yeah, I would co-sign that, definitely.
Yeah, I was glad I waited, so.
Yeah, me too. I felt a little awkward because I think sometimes people come to my site looking for the reviews, and at the end of the day, this is a hobby for me and it's an outlet for me. I don't feel beholden to review a book if I, for my own reading experience and for my own reading enjoyment, want to hold it back. And that's what I chose to do. And I probably will not write reviews for all 3 of these issues, just because it's a lot of writing at this point to get caught up on a book when there's another issue coming out. And when we record this, it's Monday night. We're 2 days away from the next issue 53. So I don't feel obligated to go back and rewrite reviews for those books.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll say this about the first 3 issues that Jurgens wrote. Anybody could actually jump on at this point on issue 50 and be comfortable reading forward to the end. I mean, he doesn't show a lot of reflection from the past, other than the fact that you're missing some characterization. So a lot of people could jump on at issue 50 and be comfortable reading this for it being like a single story arc.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it is a good jumping man point. And I think there's enough of the characterization that's provided, especially for, Jessica Cruz and that whole dancing scene in the nightclub, that you get the whole, her journey is this kind of thing. I think there's enough there that you could pick it up. It does make it new reader friendly. I'm looking forward to, I shouldn't say looking forward, I'm interested in seeing the sales numbers. Does the book get a bump because people who are reading the Hal Jordan book jump over that maybe weren't buying Green Lanterns? Or does it suffer a little because Green Lanterns fans leave because the dynamic's not there? I'm interested in seeing that to see, was this a good move from a sales and marketing perspective?
It could also get a little bit of a boost with Jurgens jumping on the title. I mean, he's pretty popular in the DC universe, so.
Yeah, that's very true. So let's take a quick break and we'll come back and we'll do our retro review. What do you think?
All right, sounds great.
This is Salak, Green Lantern of Sector 1418, and you are receiving the podcast of Oa.
The podcast of
All right, guys, welcome back. Well, Myron, here we are once again, retro review. You were tasked with going back into Green Lantern history and finding a single storyline that you thought was interesting to bring forward for our listeners to check it out. So what'd you come up with?
Well, I thought I would talk about one of my favorite 3-issue arcs from the entire Silver and Bronze Age run of Green Lantern. And this was Green Lantern Volume 2, issues number 133, 134, and 135. And this is, just to set it in time frame, this is the early 80s time frame, and this is shortly after Denny O'Neil left the book. Denny O'Neil did the Hard Traveling Heroes with Neil Adams, and then after that ended and the book was canceled, Green Lantern kind of was a backup in the Flash book, and then they relaunched with Mike Grell on art and Denny O'Neil writing. And after a while, right around issue 133, this is when Marv Wolfman took over, and Marv Wolfman should be no surprise to anybody who's read DC books, because he's, like Dan Jurgens, a staple at DC for many, many years. And these issues were the first 3 issues in a 20-issue run that he did. And joining him on art was kind of the, when we talk about artists that are kind of iconic and iconically associated with Green Lantern, you've got Gil Kane and Denny O'Neil and Ethan Van Sciver. Well, during this time frame, the go-to guy for Green Lantern was Joe Staton. So
I like his art. His art's great.
Yeah, it's very, very classic, and he was the artist on these issues for quite a while. These guys did a team, like I said, 20 issues, and this was a time frame when DC was trying to promote some of the minor characters. So this was an era when the issues themselves only had 17 pages, and then there was 8 pages of a backup story that ran in the issue. So Hal was sharing the book with Adam Strange. So I'm not going to talk about the Adam Strange stories, but when you think about the story arc, realize that there were actually 17 pages of Green Lantern story per issue. And this was a story where Wolfman wanted to really kind of set the pace for what was going to be the backbone of his run. And one of the things he did was he tried to reunite Hal and Carol. They've always had a cyclical relationship, and this was a time frame when there was a wedge between them. And one of the things he really did was focus on why did Carol push Hal away. And there's a really great scene in issue 133 where she's talking to Hal about how her ego prevented her from really embracing Hal, and she has this really heartfelt speech, and Hal doesn't say a word, and when she turns him around to see what's going on, Hal's crying, and the two of them embrace, and it rekindles their relationship. And so you kind of had that going on, but then there were two plots in this three-issue arc. One of them carried over beyond the end of the 3 issues, and one was the subject of the arc itself. The larger plot had to deal with Carol and her family. And the Ferris family, her parents are on vacation. This is when Carl Ferris has given the company over to Carol. And Carl has gone overseas with his wife, and they've been abducted unbeknownst to Carol. In the meantime, while they're testing this solar-powered prototype plane, which keeps crashing, Carol is subpoenaed by the military to testify in Washington, and Ferris Air is at risk of losing all of their contracts, which would force them out of business.
Which ends up happening. Doesn't it end up happening in, that was 134, right?
Yeah, in that time frame, yeah, they end up losing the contracts. And this is also the reintroduction of Dr. Polaris. Now, we saw Dr. Polaris in Green Lanterns not too long ago. And you remember Neil Emerson, Neil, the brother that dies? That Neil Emerson is the Dr. Polaris we're talking about in this issue. And what happens in this arc is that Dr. Polaris has managed to amplify his powers by going to the North Pole and building a base there. Yeah, he's internalized his power, so he no longer has to have that little gauntlet he has. And he lures Hal in this first issue, lures Hal to the North Pole, and basically defeats Hal and adds Hal's power ring to his level of power he already has. It's already amplified. So that's the first issue. That's 17 pages.
I know, and a lot happens really fast. And, and the art, Stanton's art is great on it. You know what I mean? He's spot on with a lot of it, all the panels.
Yeah, it's classic stuff. Now, the middle issue was the issue that really drew me to this arc. This one really resonated with me. And when I get done kind of recounting this issue, I'll tell you why. But Dr. Polaris in issue 134 descends on Los Angeles with his new amped up abilities, and he does these great displays of magnetic power. Just think of Magneto from the movies and how, he's taking on moving tanks and all these things. But beyond all that, he's figured out how to, through the power of magnetism, manipulate the electrical charges in people's brains and control them and basically make them his thralls. And then he saps their magnetic energy from inside their bodies to make them even stronger. So as he gains more followers, he's getting stronger and stronger. Meanwhile, Hal has broken free, and he's stranded at the North Pole with no resources at all. So he's got no power ring. He's got no resources. He can't communicate with anybody. So Hal takes off into the wilderness, and he wanders around. He ends up at one point using the threads from his uniform to catch fish in order to survive. And then he's attacked by not only a polar bear, but a wolf. And he's left freezing in Snowblind in the Arctic. And all he really has to push him on, the only thing he's got is his willpower and his will to live. And Marv Wolfman really drives home how harsh the elements are and how the environment really is pushing Hal. Hal should not be able to survive. He makes it basically look like a very insurmountable task, which it is, just to stay alive. And his writing on Hal's inner monologue is great because Hal he refuses to quit, which is what you expect. Mm-hmm. And he eventually finds a research station and just collapses. Meanwhile, Carol is abducted as well by this mysterious person. So she fails to appear at the hearing in Washington. So they do cancel all the government contracts. And then to add to all of it all, Ferris Aircraft is bombed and destroyed.
No. That happens a lot to poor Ferris Aircraft. It seems like it happens a lot of times in these books.
That's true. Now, Tom Kalmaku is in the book, and Tom has been going through his own life crises and the loss of Ferris Air and the fact that he's going to lose his job now. He spirals into this deep depression over the destruction of Ferris Aircraft, and in an It's a Wonderful Life moment, he goes to a bridge and he's ready to jump off and kill himself. And just as he's about to do that, Hal shows up, finds him. Hal's still half blind due to the exposure, so he's got these sunglasses. He hasn't been able to find a change of clothes, so he's wearing his Green Lantern uniform without the green part. So it's black with the green boots and the white gloves. No power ring. This is silly Brian Jage stuff a little bit here.
He looks cool. He kind of he looks like a cross between either like Plastic Man or I don't know, with those big sunglasses on. It's kind of fun.
It is kind of fun. And Hal's like, with all the problems that are going on right now, you're ready to kill yourself. What kind of pity party is this? And he has this great line where he goes, Hal says to Tom, he goes, you can stuff all your problems through the eye of a needle and still have room left over for God to slip through. And Tom, he ends up snapping out of it. And so it's going to be Hal and Tom to the rescue. And they don't know that Carol's kidnapped yet. So that brings us to the finale of the arc, issue 135, where Hal and Tom kind of sneak inside of Polaris' throng of followers, and it ends up that Polaris is able to sense that they're not of the body, and so Dr. Polaris takes control of Tom and basically sends Tom and a whole mob of his throngs after the half-blind and unpowered Hal, and so Hal basically starts trolling Emerson. And basically, Polaris sends wave after wave of attacks at Hal. And what Hal's doing is he's trying to get himself close enough to do something. And he ends up taking part of the solar jet components and he turns it into basically a yellow field, which of course negates the power ring. Hang on, we've got to go back to the Silver Age mentality of the yellow being the opposite of green thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so Hal gets close enough that he's able to will the ring off of Polaris' hand and onto his own. And just like that, Hal's back to full strength. Polaris reveals his end game, that it involves the magnetic core of the universe. And Hal ends up defeating him, and Dr. Polaris is absorbed by the magnetic core of the universe, and that ends the plot. So the whole subplot of Carol Ferris is left dangling to be followed up later. And what was kind of interesting was the solar jet was designed by Bruce Gordon, who, for those that don't know, is Eclipso.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yep, so Eclipso had gone into remission, and he was starting to emerge, and so he was sabotaging the solar jet project to weaken Bruce Gordon so that he could emerge and take complete control of Gordon's body.
That's interesting, man. I didn't know that at all.
Yep. And then there's a whole thing where Hal ends up shortly in the issues that follow. Hal gets pulled to the 58th century just as he was about to rescue Tom from a falling building, which fell during a battle with Eclipso. And at the end of the day, it turns out that the tormentor of the Ferris family was a guy by the name of Conrad Block. And Conrad Block was one of the co-founders of Ferris Air. And he had a lot of impropriety in his life. And he and Carl Ferris parted ways due to Block's improprieties. And so then Block starts his own company, his own rival company. And they were dueling for this contract of this solar jet. And when Block's company lost the contract, Block destroyed the test facility that Ferris had set up, and he was injured, and it drove him crazy. And so he was trying to destroy Carl Ferris and Ferris Air itself. Carl ends up at the end, after the story's all resolved, Carl ends up taking control of Ferris Aircraft again. Carol and Hal go on a road trip together, and that's where they meet the Omega Men.
Huh, that's really interesting, man. Boy, you know your stuff back then, didn't you?
So,
impressive, Myron. That is very impressive. What
really drew me to the story was issue 134, and it's the whole sequence with Hal in the frozen Arctic where he's wandering and he's got to talk to himself to keep himself from passing out and dying in this frozen Arctic wilderness. And for me, it underscored what Green Lantern is about. This is a Hal without a power ring for most of this story. Yet he still overcomes and achieves despite great odds because of just his sheer will. And for me, for somebody who wrestled with this birth defect that I have and having to basically will myself through some difficult tasks, this arc was very representative to me at the time. I think maybe 16, 17 at the time. So this really resonated with me because it was essentially a comic book version of what I felt I would go through when Hal's going through the Arctic.
That's a really interesting analogy. Yeah, that's really cool. Well, and what was I going to say about Hal Jordan? Hal Jordan has always been that resilient character. I mean, he's gotten out of his occasions time and time again, even without the ring. So we've seen that in recent stuff, let alone back in the past.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's an undercurrent of the character is that he's the same guy without the ring that he is with the ring. The ring just allows him to do things obviously easier and allows him to accomplish greater tasks. But that was what always drew into the character. to me, that was what was great about Green Lantern for me. This encapsulated what I loved about the character and what drew me to it and what made Green Lantern my favorite character. It wasn't about, I love the sci-fi elements and all that stuff, but it wasn't like Batman who's got money to buy the gadgets and is trying to avenge his dying parents. This is about anybody who's got an obstacle in front of them and can overcome it. And we can all do it. We all have that power inside of ourselves. And this to me was very synonymous with the fierceness of the human spirit when we refuse to give up or give in.
That's a good way to put it. People should take note of that. And you're right. You're exactly right. And we pick up a lot of that stuff from comic books. I read them all the time for the sheer fact that, some of the writing can really get you through a tough spot. I've used some when I've taught before in my classes that I've with those high school kids. There's a lot of impactful writing in comic books that actually reflect the societal climate that we exist in. And I'm talking about the newer stuff. But you can bring back that older stuff from the 80s and the 90s and bring it forward, and it still resonates with readers today.
It does. And I don't want to get on my soapbox at all, but it's probably going to sound like I am anyway. But to me, these characters are pure in terms of who they are. Look beyond the color of their skin or their gender or any of those things. It's a character you can relate to. And what I find sometimes a little frustrating with today's modern audience is everybody's so wrapped up in making sure the character looks like them or has the same gender as them or the same nationality as them that they don't look past the beauty of a character regardless of any of those things, and that it's being able to see beyond the surface and see the human spirit underneath, and that's what we should be striving for.
Well, not only that, Myron. The fan base has become so toxic. There's that recent Ruby Rose was pushed off Twitter because of some slandering and stuff, and then that Star Sapphire character for the Titans movie was brutalized on the internet. And I don't understand the method behind a lot of these fandoms, because it's like, if you think about this in even the simple logical sense, these are aliens. A lot of these characters are aliens. So in effect, can that not be a different color, a different race, speak differently, look differently, act differently? That's going to be what an alien represents. So, why get on a character that's playing that, especially somebody who just wants to fill that role for an audience?
Did you mean Starfire?
Oh, so I'm sorry. Did I say Star Sapphire? I did, didn't I? I meant Sapphire from the Titans.
Okay, I thought I missed something from it. I thought Star Sapphire was going to be on a TV show. Wait a minute, I missed something.
Sorry, I meant Sapphire from the Titans. Sorry about that. But the fandom has gotten so toxic, and I don't remember it being that bad back when you and I were reading it in the 80s and 90s. It's gotten so brutal now.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is the ability to be anonymous on the internet is part of it. I think there's also an underlying current of a couple of different things going on. I think that people are polarized over anything these days. If they casted the Teen Titans show and there wasn't a person of color, people would complain. If they recast somebody and they cast a person of color or another minority in place of a character that isn't a minority in the comics, then somebody else complains. There really is a no-win situation with a lot of this stuff.
You're right. Especially with these kind of characters too, if it's a simple movie, you can interject a different character of a different race and not have an impact as it would when it becomes a superhero type of film. It's almost like saying, well, let's make Thor an African American. Well, he's never been an African American before, but then you get into that dichotomy of like, okay, so if we do that, what is that going to represent to the readers moving forward, to the readers that have already known him for being white,
Right, or let's look at what Marvel did in the comics with Thor, where Thor was no longer a person, it was an occupation. Right?
Right.
I really have a problem with that kind of recasting of things. It's one thing, we want new characters. We want new characters in order for this medium to grow and so on. But do we have to change stuff that people are already emotionally invested with to do that? Why can't we create a new character that's interesting? Part of my problem with Simon Baz and Jessica Cruz was we didn't need 2 more Green Lanterns. Why not create 2 new characters? I think Jessica would have been a better character as Power Ring. I think if you would use the Power Ring as the embodiment of what anxiety represents, I think readers who don't have anxiety would find ways to relate to it easier. So you build a bridge.
Right, and that's a good point. And I would like to say that I think that's true. I think she should have stayed Power Ring. I kind of miss that Power Ring character, to be honest with you. He was quirky, but he was a good character. And when that embodiment went over to Jessica in the ring, she would have been a good reflection of that character. And then Simon Baz, I mean, he was created for a specific purpose. And again, it was an unneeded lantern, and now they're overpopulated with the Earth lanterns. And then you get into that whole argument. Well, why does Earth need so many lanterns when other sectors don't have that many, right? So
right. Well, it seemed like, okay, we have a new character. We don't believe in the character strong enough to stand on their own, so let's graft them onto another franchise.
Sure. That's
why we have so many speedsters. Is the Flash really that interesting of a character when you've got that many speedsters out there? And he's not really the fastest man alive.
And they got a problem with Wally West. I mean, every time I hear about people debating the fact of who's better, Barry Allen and Wally West, and then you don't even, and the problem with the Wally West thing is, I don't know, that would be a whole different podcast.
You're right. I don't want to digress too much, but it goes back to which Wally West would you be talking about?
Sure.
That's part of the problem is if you're going to create a new Wally West to represent another part of the population, why call him Wally West?
Exactly. You're right.
But anyway, I digress. We're no longer talking about retro review at this point, so I want to swing us back on. But that was my retro review for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. The sad thing about this 3-part story is that it's not collected anywhere as far as I know. So the only way you can read it is to buy the individual issues. Right. So
I love the cover to issue 135. That was a great cover.
Yeah, those are just classic covers. They all look spectacular. The neat kind of the footnote to this whole thing was a couple of years ago I went to the Baltimore Comic-Con and both Marv Wolfman and Joe Staton were there. So I took issue 134 and they both signed it for me, and I told them what this issue meant to me, and Joe Staton actually cried.
Really?
Yeah.
That's really cool that you got to meet him, let alone have him sign this. That was really nice, Myron. That's cool.
Yeah, but this is a story that really meant a lot to me, so that's why I wanted to share that. So next episode, I'll come up with another one. I'll have to look through and see what I want to do. I've got a couple of ideas, but we'll pick something out.
All right, sounds good. And you know what? I got to say, that's really, really cool that you chose these 3 issues to bring in the retro review, and I didn't know that about you because I always questioned myself. I was like, why did he pick these 3 issues out of the whole entire Green Lantern one to focus on? I was like, that's kind of odd that he chose these 3. But now that I know, I appreciate it even more.
All right, guys. Well, we'll be back in a few moments. We've got some listener feedback, and then we'll close the show up.
All right, sounds good.
This is Robert Vendetti, and you're listening to the podcast of OA.
So, Phil, we've got 3 pieces of listener feedback, a couple of emails, a couple of comments on the website. This first one is from Daniel. So why don't you go ahead and read that one?
All right, sounds great. All right, so Daniel says, thanks so much for including my comment from the previous podcast. It's very cool to be included in this wonderful community of fans that all appreciate the same characters and mythos. Thank you, Mr. Rumsey, for creating and nurturing it. And as always, this podcast was a pleasure to listen to. You are continuing to do a fantastic job, Mr. Bova. Just to point out, Tim Seeley was writing the Batman Wedding Special tie-ins, and that is probably why he didn't finish writing the last 2 issues of Green Lanterns. And we talked about that. I'm glad he pointed that out. And probably why the other writer got thrown in to do a couple filler issues. I really enjoyed the retro review of Emerald Dawn, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts on part 2. It's been a while since I read Emerald Dawn. I have to say that I enjoyed the older art from the 80s and the 90s, and I think we both agree with that. Although this might not be the best example, I am of 2 minds about the DUI subplot. It created some opportunity for character introspection about Hal and his unresolved feelings of inadequacy towards his father, but it did fail to really delve into it in any great detail, real detail. But it was an interesting take on a young Hal. Although his feelings of trying to live up to his father was done better in the 2011 movie and in Secret Origins. As for the Dark Stars, thanks for following up on it. I'm sorry, Mr. Rumsey, if I came off wrong on calling you out on that info. I was just adding my thoughts after picking up some of the back issues. It's very interesting about some of the original recruits. I did not know that Nort joined. I would have thought that it would have been too extreme a group for him. I also didn't know about the actor that played Hal in the comics. That's really pretty funny. Thanks again for looking it up and following up on it. And it would be cool to look at issue 75 for a retro review. It would be timely for the current arc and Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps. It will be interesting to see what happens to all the different Earths, GLs, after Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps finishes up. Thanks again for the great content and listener feedback. Looking forward to more. Thanks, Daniel. That was chock full of stuff. So, Myron, you're going to have to kind of unpack some of that for me to give me some background on what he was referring to.
Well, we were talking, we were talking about Dark Stars, and I think I made a couple of faux pas. And one of the things that happens when you and I are talking, or when any two people are talking, you're trying to rely on your memory, and we all make mistakes. And unfortunately, this is documented and recorded and sent out into to history. So
you're right. You're so right. Hey, listeners, by the way, I'm going to be 45 soon, so cut me a little slack.
Hey, next month I turn 54, so.
We're up there.
We're getting old, and memory is not what it used to be. Like it sounded like during that retro review, I may have recalled all that from my brain, but actually, I wrote a lot of that stuff down in notes to prepare for the episode, and that's the difference between preparing something for a segment and talking about it off the cuff, and not always having the time to do any research.
Right.
But I do have to agree with Dan's point about Emerald Dawn. This was an attempt to make, I don't want to say marvelize Hal, but was trying to add some layers of depth. And I think some of the disjointedness that Emerald Dawn had was because the writers changed. Christopher Priest, aka James Owsley, left after that first issue, and so you kind of had you had Gerard Jones taking over, so you didn't have a singular vision all the way through. And I agree. If this was going to be the subplot, it would have been nice to have had some real introspection and to have this dealt with in a way that made that whole subplot seem meaningful. In the end, it kind of felt like it was just tacked on as a plot device.
Well, what year did that come out? Do you remember what year that issue came out?
I gotta say it was late 80s, early 90s. I don't remember the exact year now.
So I wonder, because I was looking at your issues 134 and 35 that we just did in the retro review, and a lot of them had that Comic Code Authority tacked on the front of it. So it's just interesting to note that some content would have been excluded with that code, especially in the 80s. Yeah,
that's true. That's true.
Just throwing it out there because I know it caused a lot of issues, especially with that Green Lantern Green Arrow crossover with the junkie. You remember the guy that was shooting up on the cover?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, that might be part of it. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah, but no, Daniel, we appreciate the feedback and we love hearing from people. So the next message we got was from Chad, and he says, "Hey guys, Green Lantern Prime here. Just finished listening to episodes 123 and 124, and once again, really enjoyed it. First, I wanted to say I'm glad Phil's doing great. I also wanted to touch on something you spoke on with Arisia in episode 123, mentioning that Arisia was created after Emerald Dawn. Emerald Dawn 1 was published in 1989, and Arisia was created in 1981. I didn't mean to come off as condescending, just wanted to correct the slip up. Again, really enjoying the podcast. Please keep it up." Chad, thank you for doing that. As I said, oftentimes when we're recording stuff, we're trying to pull from memories and we make mistakes, so I'm glad that somebody kind of calls us on it so we can correct it, because I'd like to have the right information out there. And you're exactly right about Arisia being created in 1981. She was created by Mike Barr for a 3-issue. She was originally created as part of this 3-issue Tales of the Green Lantern Corps mini series that came out. And I'm going to pull out the geek facts from back in the day. Phil, do you know what Arisia's backstory is as to not the character but her name?
Vaguely. You're going to know more about it than I am. I can tell you that much right now.
So Julie Schwartz, back in the day. Now, Julie Schwartz is a name that not a lot of people know. Julie Schwartz was the guy. No disrespect to Stan Lee, but Julie Schwartz really is the godfather of modern comics. Julie Schwartz was the guy at DC who looked at the superhero concept after the whole seduction of the innocent phase and said, hey, maybe it's time to bring back superheroes. And so he's the one that led to modernizing the Flash and giving him the more science fiction-y origin. And then he did the same thing with Green Lantern. And Julie Schwartz was also a science fiction editor. So when it came to Green Lantern, he wanted to pull from classic sci-fi. And so part of the creation of the Green Lantern Corps mythology owes a great deal to the books of the Lensman. They were called the Lensman books.
That's by E.E. Smith, right?
You are exactly correct. E.E. Doc Smith. And Arisia is the name of a planet in the Lensman.
I didn't know that. I didn't know it came from that. I remember Lensman and E. Smith, but I didn't know that Arisia came from that. It's really interesting.
And Arisia's last name is Rab, R-R-A-B.
Which is bar backwards.
Exactly.
That's really cool, man.
Yeah. I love stuff like that,
And go Chad for fact checking, man. And yeah, I can't thank you enough for doing that, Chad. I mean, we try to get the stuff right, but it ain't always going to work out that way. But we have cool fans that will at least set us straight. So that means a lot to us.
It absolutely does. And I appreciate it. It also allows me, like, when stuff like this comes up, I go back and I got to correct myself. So I go back and I do the research to make sure, I want to make sure that what's said is accurate. So I go back and I do the research, and that was where I was reminded of Arisia's backstory in terms of her character name. And I just think it's a neat piece of trivia that I wanted to share. So it's cool. I appreciate that stuff. The last comment we got was from Charlie, and Charlie's in the UK. So love hearing from folks from other countries. I'm not going to read this in a British accent because I would probably cause an international incident with how poor my accent is. But Charlie says, "Hi guys, I'm a huge DC fan, but I've only recently jumped on the Green Lantern wagon. I'm up to date with Hal Jordan Rebirth and want to start another Green Lantern story. I just bought Secret Origin and was wondering if you can send me a list on where to go for the rest of them. Where do I start? Also, I love the podcast. Thanks." So, Charlie, I sent an email to a response, and basically what I suggested to Charlie was I wouldn't go back further than the Jeff Johns run if you're just really getting into it, because a lot of that stuff doesn't have relevance today. Sure, there's some really cool stories like what we just talked about, but in terms of trying to get with the current incarnation of Green Lantern, you really only need to go back to the Jeff Johns run. So what I suggested to Charlie was to go back to Green Lantern Rebirth and go forward. And what I suggested to him was, before he reads Rebirth, check out the DC Comics, go to Wikipedia and pull up Hal Jordan's history, read the section on the 90s that tells you the plot synopsis for Emerald Twilight before you read Green Lantern Rebirth, because that will help you understand what happened to the character up right before then. And then just read forward. And I pointed him to a website that had a chronological reading order that intermixed the Green Lantern Corps books and the Green Lantern books and kind of gave you a chronological reading order. And I said, start there. My best suggestion to him was to pick up the omnibuses, the Jeff Johns Green Lantern omnibuses, because if you buy all three of those, you get the backbone of everything that occurred during the Jeff Johns era. You get Rebirth, you get Sinestro Corps War, you get the entire Jeff Johns run with other books thrown in on top of it. They're expensive, but they're probably cheaper than buying the individual trades.
Right, and they're worth it. I mean, even though they're expensive, and I mean, we as comic book fans know how expensive our hobbies are, but they're really worth it, and they look great on a shelf.
Well, those omnibuses right now, I think, now I know Charlie lives in the UK, so I'm not sure how the price compares over, but I know on the US Amazon site, they're between $60 and $70 for 1,000 pages of comics.
It's worth an investment.
Yep. The other site I would point people to if they're interested in those omnibuses is a site called In Stock Trades. They sell trade paperbacks and hardcovers at 40 to 60% off of cover price. So in some cases, it was cheaper to go to In-Stock Trades versus Amazon, and in some cases, it's the other way around. So that's my suggestion.
All right, cool.
As always, we appreciate your guys' input, and we hope to hear more from you guys.
Hey guys, welcome back. Well, Myron, we wrapped up yet another episode of the podcast. I can tell you right now, I'm feeling pretty good, man. It's getting more comfortable as the weeks go on.
Good. I'm glad. It's something that gets easier and easier the longer you do it.
It does. I do have a task for some of our listeners though, and you and I spoke off the cusp. I'm looking for Sodam Yat. There was a Green Lantern called Sodam Yat. Everybody should know who he is, and I'm trying to figure out where he was last seen, what issue it was in, what story arc. If anybody has any knowledge of it, email it in. You can post it on my Twitter. You can find me at Phil Bova, and let me know. I'm really curious because he was I liked him as a Lantern, and I'm trying to find out where he was last seen. So that's my task for the listeners going forward.
So Phil gave you guys some homework.
That's right. I gave you guys some homework, right? And we got dedicated fans out there. One of you guys has to know what happened to this character. So that's all I'm saying.
All right. Well, we should be back in a couple weeks, and we'll have at least one issue of Green Lanterns to talk about, and it may be another special episode with Dan Jurgens, or depending on what his schedule is, it might be a little bit later. But
all right, looking forward to it, Myron.
Absolutely. So until next time, everybody take care of each other, make every day your brightest day, and keep your power ring charged, guys.
See you guys later.
The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.